Warhammer was a big part of my life while I was growing up. I loved reading the, I guess now old, codexes and the Black Library novels. They really captured my imagination. And while I did love the miniatures and I enjoyed painting them, I could never really get into the game itself. I'm talking about Warhammer 40,000 here, of course. And maybe we'll talk some about my reactions to the game in another video. One of the elements that I didn't find particularly interesting and that I didn't really enjoy was the Adeptus Mechanicus. But that's all changed now. Or at least it's changed somewhat. And so I thought we should take a moment and talk about what made me like the Mechanicum more than the Adeptus Mechanicus, and why you might change your mind too. One of the main reasons was the way the cult of the machine was portrayed. And too often, I still see this in media now, it just comes across as childish and ridiculous. And I'm talking about the religious elements specifically here. And maybe that's part of the, overall intention of the fiction and the setting. But I just found it unappealing. I also never really liked their obsession with mechanical augmentation. But maybe that's just more of an aesthetic or principle thing on my part. The biggest reason, though, I think, was how they were portrayed in the Black Library novels. Because really almost, at least exclusively in my experience, they're portrayed as some kind of cross between the Borg from Star Trek and these goofy, emotionless space Vulcans. And despite their vaunted intelligence, they always seemed like they were dumb, in-the-way characters who were primarily present to serve as foils for other characters to show how smart and skillful they were. And I have to say that the new Adeptus Mechanicus models, which were not out when I was, interested in 40K and growing up with it and reading about it, these models just don't do much to change this impression, at least for me. Clearly there are some people out there who love these miniatures, but I am not one of them. The bizarre Leonardo da Vinci Renaissance style machines just don't do it for me. So what's changed my mind? A while back, I watched a few of Winter's SEO's videos and battle reports, and he talked a little bit about how the Mechanicum of the Horus Heresy was quite distinct from the Adeptus Mechanicus of 40K. And while this had been something I was vaguely aware of in some sense, I hadn't really come to grips with it until I watched his videos. And the key element he highlighted was the idea of the Mechanicum acting like a feudal medieval society. And that really changed my perspective. The idea of technological expertise and excellence as a stand-in for nobility and combat ability really appealed to me somehow. And the image of a hierarchy established by joined bonds of production and fiefs of factories and power plants seemed much more interesting than the more dominantly religious aspect of the Adeptus Mechanicus. And that medieval attitude, I think, carries over to their religion as well, or this is my impression, or maybe what I like to believe about the Mechanicum. And instead of the sort of overblown religious devotion that I think we see portrayed for the Adeptus Mechanicus, we have a much more practical, more grounded understanding of the machine god in the Mechanicum cult. I wouldn't say it's necessarily cynical, but I think it's getting close to it, right? It's maybe something more like the religion of the ancient Romans, where it was much more about performative, or the phrase is do ut des, right? I give so that you will give. I sacrifice to the god so that the god will do things for me. And I think that seems closer to, this sort of everyday idea of the Omnissiah that we see in the Mechanicum. And two, I feel like with that sort of framework, the tech priests of the Mechanicum lack the bumbling incompetence of their 40K descendants. They're all too human, despite the willful transformation and mutilation of their bodies. They aren't dull, inept morons, but clever, careful, and skilled manipulators and politicians. as medieval nobles must have been, or doomed themselves to failure. And another part of it is just we have to face the fact that the Mechanicum miniatures for the Horus Heresy are just much better than those available for the Adeptus Mechanicus for 40k. Now, there's probably some disagreement there from a few people. I think on the whole, most people would agree that the Horus Heresy figures for the Mechanicum have been outstanding so far, and they're just, I think, head and shoulders above what's on offer for the Adeptus Mechanicus. And honestly, the Legions Imperialis versions are just as good. Of course, there's some loss of detail, going from 28mm to epic scale, but I think the designers have done a really great job with them. They are a little fiddly to assemble, but personally I'm willing to pay that price for good-looking figures. And in truth, I didn't even really find assembly to be that big of a deal, but I know there are some out there who have been frustrated with the number of small parts involved in the automata particularly. With all the lore talk out of the way, let's talk a little bit about why I like the Mechanicum and Legions Imperialis particularly. As I said, it's a great-looking force on the tabletop, but more importantly, the designers and writers have done a great job of ensuring that the Mechanicum army plays very differently from the Astartes and the Solar Auxilia. They don't have a lot of special rules or abilities, but their attachments are tough and dangerous, and they are slow, but they have a lot of firepower. It really does feel like a breath of fresh air when I put my Mechanicum army on the table instead of the Solar Auxilia that I've been playing for so long. In general, if you're looking for a tough, dependable army, the Mechanicum might be for you. Many of the automata have 2 wounds, which means that although they don't have high saves, they are going to be sticking around on the table for a while, especially if there's a Tech Priest or Archmagos around to support them with Battlesmith. Because so much of your army are automata without a morale stat, you really won't have to deal with your units falling back very often, making them great for assaulting fixed positions. As I mentioned before, Mechanicum units also have a ton of firepower, and even though it is often short-ranged, if your opponent misplaces a unit, they will quickly regret it. Part of that also means that you have to be a little bit more thoughtful about your own placement and of how you play, which may be more rewarding, as I think the Mechanicum really benefits from skillful and thoughtful play, just because of their unit composition and their weapons. Another reason you might like Mechanicum is also that they have very easy access to Knights and Titans. If you're all about the heavy metal, Mechanicum might be the army for you. There are a couple of reasons you might not like the Mechanicum, though. The first is that right now the range is fairly incomplete. We do have quite a few options, but we're still missing a few detachments like the Krios tanks, the Arachnos, and so on. The Mechanicum units are also fairly idiosyncratic, meaning that they don't really fall into the neat conventional unit types like infantry and armor that the Astartes and Solar Auxilia align with. So the units, I'm trying to say, don't necessarily function how you might expect them to. And that isn't necessarily a bad thing, but it does mean you'll need to be a little bit more careful and a little more thoughtful when building your army. And lastly, you might not like the Mechanicum because you're probably going to have to take allies if you want certain capabilities. And these capabilities are not incidental either. They are really key to playing Legions Imperialis. And that is to say, right now the Mechanicum don't have much at all in the way of anti-air firepower, nor really any ability to infiltrate, deep strike, or conduct any kind of air assault. And I'm afraid that I don't see much likelihood that they'll have these abilities organically anytime soon. All that means is that if you want any of those capabilities, which are important, you'll need Solar Auxilia or Astartes allies in order to round out your force. I've had a few comments on previous videos saying that they weren't too interested in building a Mechanicum force, and I sympathize, but I hope this video has given you a new perspective on the Mechanicum. I know I certainly have really enjoyed building and playing them in my games so far, much more than I was expecting to, based on some of the reasons that I described earlier in the video. And I hope you will have the same experience if you decide to dig more into the Mechanicum and build your own force. I know this was a bit of an experimental video, but if you enjoyed hearing my thoughts about the lore of the Horus Heresy, please make sure you like and subscribe, and don't forget to leave a comment down below and tell us about your own thoughts about the Mechanicum. Do you like their lore, their miniatures, and how they play in Legions Imperialis, or even Age of Darkness? I'd love to hear your thoughts. That's all for now. I'll see you in the next video.